My father, a supposedly respected community pastor, stood on our front lawn with his phone streaming to over 1,000 people declaring me a worthless leech as he kicked my trash bags down the driveway. What he did not know was that the house he was kicking me out of legally belonged to me, and his precious golden child was married to a fraud. Before I share how I dismantled his fake empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat. I am Maya, 33 years old, and until a few months ago, I was living a quiet life as a senior forensic accountant in Chicago. But my family thought I was an unemployed failure who came crawling back home. The Sunday sun beat down aggressively on the manicured lawn of my childhood home. Reverend Calvin, my father, wore a custom-tailored gray suit that cost more than my first car. He held his smartphone high in the air, making sure the camera captured my humiliation perfectly. 3 heavy black trash bags sat on the grass. One of them had torn open, spilling my modest clothes and a few pairs of shoes onto the sidewalk. Neighbors were already peeking through their blinds, drawn to the booming voice of the man who preached about grace every Sunday, but practiced cruelty at home. "This is what tough love looks like." "Church family," my father announced to his digital audience. His voice echoed down the quiet suburban street. "Sometimes the Lord requires us to prune the dead branches so the tree can thrive." My eldest daughter, Maya, is 33 years old. She refuses to work. She refuses to contribute. Today I am washing my hands of this burden. He kicked the torn bag again, sending a sweater tumbling into the gutter. I stood silent on the driveway. I did not shed a single tear. I just watched the performance. On the porch, my younger sister Destiny leaned against the white brick columns. She was 29, the undisputed golden child, and currently wearing a designer dress paid for by the very man kicking me out. She was busy checking her own reflection in her phone screen, completely indifferent to the spectacle. Next to her stood her husband, Chad. Chad was a 31-year-old finance bro who believed marrying a black woman gave him a pass to lecture our entire family on generational wealth. Chad stepped off the porch, adjusting his expensive sunglasses. He walked down the driveway with a smug smile plastered across his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $100 bill. He tossed it casually in my direction. The bill fluttered through the thick summer air and landed near my feet. "Call an Uber," Maya, Chad said loud enough for the live stream to hear. "If you had listened to my real estate seminars, you would not be begging your parents for a roof over your head. You have a poverty mindset. It is sad, really. We are trying to build an empire here, and you are dragging down the property value." Destiny laughed from the porch, a high-pitched sound that made my stomach turn. She finally looked away from her screen to chime in. "Do not waste your money on her, Chad," she sneered. "She will probably just spend it on junk food anyway." My father nodded in agreement, turning the camera toward Chad and Destiny. "Look at this beautiful, successful couple," my father preached to the phone. "They understand hard work. They are taking over the family legacy." I let his words hang in the hot air. I looked at the three of them. A hypocritical pastor, a spoiled sister, and a condescending brother-in-law who was currently drowning in federal wire fraud. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. I slowly bent down and picked up the crumpled $100 bill from the concrete. I took my time smoothing out the creases. I looked directly into the lens of my father's phone. "Are you absolutely sure you want this on the permanent internet record, Reverend?" I asked. My voice was dangerously calm and steady. My father lowered the phone slightly, his pastoral smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. "The truth hurts, daughter," he replied stiffly, trying to regain his dominant posture. I slipped the $100 bill into my pocket. "Keep the clothes," I said. "I will not be needing them." Right on cue, a sleek black luxury vehicle pulled up to the curb. It was a booked private car, not the cheap rideshare Chad had suggested. The driver stepped out immediately wearing a crisp black suit. He opened the rear door for me without saying a word. The smug expression on Chad's face instantly evaporated. Destiny stopped typing on her phone and stared. My father stood frozen on the lawn holding his camera at an awkward angle. They expected me to drag those trash bags down the street in shame. Instead, I stepped into the air-conditioned leather interior of the luxury vehicle. I rolled down the tinted window just enough to look my father in the eye one last time. "I will be in touch about the property taxes," I said softly. Before he could process the meaning of those words, the window rolled up completely. The driver gently closed the door and returned to the front seat. As the heavy car pulled away from the curb, I looked back through the rear window. My father was no longer speaking to his live stream. He was just staring at the empty space where I had been standing, while Chad frantically tried to pull out his own phone. I leaned back into the comfortable seat and let out a long breath. The war had officially begun, and they just handed me the first victory. The leather seats of the SUV were cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the heavy heat I had just left behind on my father's front lawn. I watched the familiar suburban streets of my childhood neighborhood blur past the tinted windows. Houses with perfectly manicured lawns and hidden secrets faded into the distance. For the first time in 3 months, I allowed my shoulders to drop. The knot of tension that had lived in my stomach since the day I moved back into that toxic house finally began to loosen. The driver offered me a bottle of sparkling water without speaking, and I took it with a silent nod of gratitude. The silence in the car was beautiful. It was a luxury I had been deprived of while living under the roof of Reverend Calvin, where every conversation was a sermon, and every interaction was a performance for an invisible audience. I took a slow sip of the water and pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was already lighting up with notifications from family members who had watched the live stream, but I ignored them all. I needed a moment to breathe and to formally introduce myself to you. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Maya and I am 33 years old. My family believes I am a pathetic failure who could not make it in the real world. They think I lost my mid-level corporate job and came crawling back to my childhood bedroom because I had nowhere else to go. They think I spent the last 3 months sleeping until noon and eating their food while secretly resenting their success. That is the narrative my father has been selling to his congregation and our relatives. But that is entirely a lie. I am actually a senior forensic accountant, specializing in corporate fraud for one of the largest financial firms in Chicago. I track hidden assets for a living. I unravel complex financial lies and follow the money when powerful people try to make it disappear. I did not move back home because I was broke. I moved back home because 3 months ago, I accidentally intercepted a piece of mail addressed to my father from a major commercial bank. It was a pre-foreclosure notice for the property my grandmother left behind. I knew my father and Chad were hiding something massive, and I needed to be inside the house to gather the evidence without them noticing. My phone vibrated violently in my hand, pulling me out of my thoughts. The caller ID flashed with the name Aunt Denise. She is my mother's younger sister and the ultimate family gossip. If my father is the cult leader of our family, Aunt Denise is his most devoted follower and enforcer. She considers it her personal duty to make sure everyone bows down to the Reverend. I swiped the screen to accept the call and brought the phone to my ear. I did not even get a chance to say hello before her shrill voice pierced my eardrum. "Maya, what is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "I am sitting here watching your father's live stream and I am physically sick to my stomach. How dare you disrespect that man in front of his entire congregation? He put a roof over your head when you had absolutely nothing. He fed you. He prayed for your worthless soul, and you walk away like some ungrateful brat while he is trying to teach you a valuable lesson. You are a complete embarrassment to this family." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, letting her toxic words spill out into the quiet interior of the luxury car. I looked out the window, watching the suburban landscape slowly give way to the sprawling highways leading toward the city. Aunt Denise was still screaming. She told me I needed to turn the car around immediately, get on my knees, and beg my father for forgiveness. She said Chad and Destiny were the only ones keeping the family legacy alive while I was a stain on our good name. I waited until she paused to take a breath. "Are you finished?" I asked calmly. My tone caught her off guard and she sputtered for a second. Embarrassing him, I continued, keeping my voice low and dangerously steady. "You want to talk about embarrassing the family, Denise? Let us talk about when my mother was dying. Let us talk about how she needed intense physical therapy just to be able to walk to the bathroom, and your precious reverend refused to pay for it. Do you remember what he said, Denise? Because I remember every single word. He said the church needed a new surround sound system for the choir, and that God would heal her if she just prayed harder. He let his own wife suffer in agony so he could look good holding a microphone on Sunday mornings. Do not you ever call me an embarrassment again." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Aunt Denise breathing heavily, trying to formulate a response. I simply tapped the screen and ended the call. I blocked her phone number immediately. I tossed my phone onto the empty passenger seat next to me and laughed softly to myself. The irony of them calling me a failure was sweet. The highway traffic began to thicken as the towering skyline of downtown Chicago appeared on the horizon. This was my real world, not the fake suburban kingdom my father ruled. The driver navigated through the busy city streets, finally pulling up to a sleek residential building overlooking the lake. The friendly doorman greeted me respectfully by name as he opened the doors. "Welcome home, Miss Maya," he said, smiling. I stepped into the private elevator, swiped my key fob, and watched the numbers climb rapidly to the penthouse floor. The elevator doors slid open, with a soft chime revealing the expansive foyer of my penthouse. I stepped onto the polished hardwood floors, leaving the chaos of the suburbs far behind me. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a stunning panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and the dark waters of Lake Michigan. The apartment was completely silent. There were no booming sermons from the hallway, no passive-aggressive sighs from the kitchen, and no condescending lectures about cryptocurrency from a brother-in-law who did not know the difference between a secure asset and a Ponzi scheme. I walked straight to the kitchen island, dropped my keys onto the marble counter, and took a deep breath of the crisp, air-conditioned air. I opened my dual-zone wine fridge and pulled out a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon that cost more than what my father paid for his weekly tailored suits. I poured a generous amount into a crystal glass, swirling the dark red liquid before taking a long, satisfying sip. The rich flavors grounded me. I walked over to my plush velvet sofa and sank into the cushions, resting my glass on the glass coffee table. I grabbed my tablet from the side table and woke up the screen. It was time to see exactly how much rope my family had decided to hang themselves with. I tapped the blue Facebook icon and navigated directly to Reverend Calvin's public page. I did not even have to search for the video. It was the first thing on his timeline, proudly displayed for his thousands of followers and our massive extended family. The live stream had ended over an hour ago, but the engagement metrics were skyrocketing. The video already had over 500 comments, and the number was climbing every time I refreshed the page. I clicked on the comment section and leaned back, watching the cruelty unfold in real time. It was a digital firing squad, and my family members were fighting over who got to pull the trigger first. Cousin Marcus had chimed in with a laughing emoji. He wrote, "I always knew her fancy accounting degree was a joke. Guess those calculators did not add up to a real job. Enjoy the homeless shelter, Maya." This was coming from a man who was currently dodging child support payments for 3 different kids. I scrolled past his comment and saw one from my Aunt Sarah, who sang in the church choir. She wrote, "It breaks my heart to see a child disrespect her parents after they graciously took her in. Praying the Lord breaks her spirit of laziness so she can learn humility." The hypocrisy was almost poetic. These were people who smiled in my face at Thanksgiving and asked me for free tax advice every April. Now they were feasting on my fabricated downfall like vultures. The overarching narrative in the comments was my supposed failure in the corporate world. When I realized I needed to move back into my father's house to investigate the foreclosure notice, I knew I needed a believable cover story. My father respects nothing but money and status. If I told him I was taking a sabbatical, he would have charged me exorbitant rent. So I told them I was caught in a massive round of corporate layoffs. I played the part of the depressed, defeated millennial who lost her mid-level accounting job. They bought it immediately because it fit perfectly into their view of me. They always wanted me to fail so they could feel better about their own mediocre choices. Destiny had spent the last 3 months leaving job applications for fast food restaurants on my pillow. Chad had offered me an unpaid internship fetching his coffee. I had swallowed every insult, smiled politely, and spent my nights digging through their financial garbage. I refreshed the page one more time. The screen blinked and a new comment appeared at the very top of the thread. It was pinned by the page administrator. My father had decided to grace his followers with a final profound thought. Reverend Calvin wrote, "Sometimes God requires us to prune the dead branches. Sometimes God removes the weeds so the flower's destiny and Chad can truly bloom." May this be a lesson to all the parents out there holding on to grown children who refuse to grow. I stared at the pinned comment. He had actually typed those words. He had publicly labeled me a weed and praised the man who was actively draining his bank accounts and ruining his credit. A cold, mechanical focus washed over me. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger was an emotion for people who did not have a plan. I had a bulletproof legal strategy. I set my wine glass down and opened the screen capture software on my tablet. I did not just take regular screenshots. I captured high-resolution images of every single comment. I made sure the timestamps, the profile pictures, and the exact phrasing were crystal clear. I documented Cousin Marcus laughing at my fake unemployment. I documented Aunt Sarah's hypocritical prayers. I captured dozens of church members echoing my father's cruel sentiments. Most importantly, I captured every single word my father typed, praising Chad and Destiny, while discarding me. I worked methodically for over an hour, scrolling, snapping, and saving. I created a new folder on my encrypted cloud drive and named it the Echo Chamber. Every screenshot was a piece of emotional insurance. I knew exactly how these people operated. When the truth finally dropped and the authorities started asking questions, they would all try to delete their comments. They would pretend they never said these things. They would claim they always loved me and were just caught up in the heat of the moment. They would try to rewrite history to save their own reputations. But the internet is forever, especially when a forensic accountant is the one taking the notes. I uploaded the final image, a close-up of my father's pinned comment about the weeds and the flowers. I closed the Facebook app and picked up my wine glass again. The trap was set, and they had just gleefully locked themselves inside it. Now it was time to see what my golden child sister was up to. I set my wine glass down and reached for my phone. If my father was commanding the Facebook congregation, I knew exactly where my sister would be rallying her own troops. I opened TikTok and typed Destiny's username into the search bar. I did not even have to scroll. Her newest video had been posted 20 minutes ago and it already had tens of thousands of views. The thumbnail was a close-up of her face, perfectly contoured, but stained with carefully orchestrated tears. I tapped the screen and let the video play. Destiny sat on the edge of her pristine white bed, looking utterly heartbroken. She sniffled delicately, dabbing the corner of her eye with a tissue, making sure the camera caught the sparkle of her massive diamond ring. "Guys, I am shaking right now," she began, her voice trembling with fake vulnerability. "I just had the most traumatic experience with my older sister. You all know my parents graciously let her move back in after she ruined her career. We tried to help her. My husband Chad even offered her a job. But today, my dad finally had to ask her to leave because her energy became completely toxic." Destiny paused for dramatic effect, letting a single tear roll down her cheek. "But that is not even the worst part. While my dad was packing her bags, she sneaked into my bedroom. She went into my Chanel purse and stole $500 in cash. That was money I had set aside for my charity foundation. I am just so broken that my own flesh and blood would steal from me. Please pray for her soul. I watched the video twice. It was an Oscar-worthy performance of absolute garbage. Destiny did not have a charity foundation. The only thing she fundraised for was her weekly spa treatments. But the internet loves a victim, and her followers were eating it up. Within seconds, my phone began vibrating continuously on the glass coffee table. The family group chats were exploding. Cousin Kiara texted, "You are disgusting, Maya, stealing from your own sister." Uncle Robert sent a direct message saying, "Do not ever show your face at our house again, you common thief." Even my own mother, who had been conspicuously absent during the front lawn eviction, sent a brief text that simply read, "I cannot believe I birthed a criminal." I did not reply to a single one of them. Arguing with a liar only validates their delusion. Let them call me a thief. Let them think I was desperate enough to steal $500. It would only make the impending reality check that much more devastating. I picked up my phone, switched it to airplane mode, and tossed it onto the sofa. I walked out of the living room and down the hall into my private home office. The room was sleek and minimalist, dominated by a massive mahogany desk and multiple high-resolution monitors. This was my actual command center. I sat down in my leather ergonomic chair and woke up my primary workstation. I bypassed the standard login screens using a secure biometric scan. I navigated through several layers of encrypted directories until I reached the main drive. There in the center of the screen was a single folder titled Grandma's Estate Foreclosure. I double-clicked the icon, and a massive database of scanned documents, financial records, and legal notices flooded the screen. This folder was the entire reason I had subjected myself to the nightmare of living in my father's house for the past 3 months. It started exactly 92 days ago. I had been visiting for a brief Sunday dinner when I walked past my father's home office. The door was slightly ajar, and I saw a thick red envelope sitting on his mahogany desk. The return address caught my eye immediately. It was from the commercial lending division of a major national bank. As a forensic accountant, I know exactly what kind of correspondence comes in envelopes like that. It is never good news. My father was in the kitchen arguing with Destiny about her credit card bill, so I slipped into his office and snapped a quick photo of the document inside the envelope. It was a pre-foreclosure notice, but it was not for his house. It was for the 50-acre commercial property my grandmother had left behind when she passed away. That land was supposed to be fully paid off and placed into an irrevocable trust for the entire family. Yet the document clearly stated that the property had been leveraged for a massive $2 million commercial loan. A loan that was severely delinquent. I knew immediately that my father did not have the financial literacy to execute a complex commercial leverage of that magnitude. Someone else had orchestrated this. Someone who thought they were the smartest person in the room. Someone like Chad. I realized then that I could not investigate this massive fraud from Chicago. I needed direct access to my father's physical files, his filing cabinets, and his incoming mail. So I fabricated a story about a massive corporate layoff. I packed my cheapest clothes, cried some fake tears, and begged my father to let me move into my old bedroom. They thought they were taking in a pathetic loser. They had no idea they were inviting a federal auditor to sleep down the hall from their crime scene. For 3 months, I played the part of the depressed failure. I let them insult me. I let them treat me like a servant. And every night while they were sleeping, I was quietly copying their hard drives, photographing their bank statements, and piecing together the exact trail of the stolen $2 million. I clicked on a subfolder labeled Bank Statements and smiled. Destiny was crying on the internet over a fake $500. I was looking at $2 million of real federal wire fraud, and I had all the receipts. As I sat staring at the digital evidence on my monitors, my phone screen suddenly lit up next to my keyboard. The caller ID displayed Chad. I did not answer it. I had absolutely no desire to hear his voice live. The call went to voicemail, but a few seconds later, a notification popped up indicating he had sent an audio message. Chad loved sending voice memos. He thought his voice carried the weight of a seasoned Wall Street executive, even though his actual resume consisted of failed cryptocurrency startups and cheap real estate seminars he bought online. He always carried himself with this unbearable white savior complex whenever he interacted with my family. He genuinely believed that marrying my sister gave him the ultimate authority to educate us all on how to build wealth. He treated my father like a gullible investor, and he treated me like a financially illiterate child. I leaned back in my leather chair and tapped the play button on the audio file, letting his voice fill my home office. "Hey, Maya," Chad began, his tone dripping with fake sympathy and overwhelming arrogance. "I just saw the live stream and I have to say I am really disappointed in how you handled things today. Your dad is a great man and he gave you a chance. But honestly, it is probably for the best that you are gone. We are entering a new chapter of generational wealth building, and your negative energy was just dragging down the vision." I let the audio play while I opened a new secure folder on my encrypted drive. "Destiny and I have big plans," Chad continued. "We are taking over the 50-acre property your grandmother left behind. We are going to develop it into an exclusive luxury wellness retreat. Think high-end yoga studios, organic juice bars, and glamping tents for corporate executives. It is going to put this family on the map." I actually laughed out loud at my empty desk. A luxury wellness retreat built by a woman who could not wake up before noon, and a man who lost his own parents' money in a digital currency scam. But Chad was not finished. He needed to make sure I felt entirely worthless before he signed off. "I know you do not really understand how real estate works, Maya, since you just crunch numbers on spreadsheets for a living," he said. "So let me explain a concept called leverage. See, poor people work for money, but wealthy people make money work for them. We do not use our own cash. We use assets. Your grandmother left a dormant asset just sitting there collecting dust. So I stepped in and took action." I took a deep breath as the audio kept playing. Chad was literally lecturing a senior forensic accountant on the definition of leverage. He was explaining basic finance to a woman who audited multinational corporations for breakfast. He spoke with the slow, deliberate pace of a kindergarten teacher explaining addition to a toddler. But what he said next completely shifted the situation from a toxic family dispute into a massive federal crime. "Your dad gave me the deed," Chad said, his voice now filled with unbearable smugness. "He signed over the rights to me and Destiny. And I took that deed to the bank and I leveraged it for a $2 million commercial development loan. We are fully funded, Maya. We are breaking ground next month, so do not bother coming back asking for a handout or claiming you have any rights to that land. You are completely cut out of the legacy. The future belongs to the risk takers. Good luck finding a new job." The audio message ended with a soft click. I sat in my chair, completely frozen for a few seconds, just processing the sheer stupidity of what I had just heard. He actually said it out loud. He recorded himself admitting to the crime and sent it directly to the victim. Let me explain exactly why Chad's smug little lecture was a death sentence for his freedom. My grandmother did not leave that 50-acre property solely to my father. She left it to the family trust. My father, my sister, and I were all equal beneficiaries under the law. In order to legally transfer that deed or leverage it for a commercial loan, every single beneficiary had to sign the authorization documents in front of a licensed notary. I never signed anything. I had been living away in Chicago for years, building my career. That meant Chad and my father had to completely forge my signature on federal bank documents to secure that $2 million loan. And now Chad had just sent an audio recording admitting that he orchestrated the leverage and took the money. He had just voluntarily confessed to multiple counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. I did not text him back. I did not call him to scream, cry, or argue. I simply downloaded the voice memo directly from the messaging application. I converted the audio file into 3 different secure digital formats. I placed one copy in the encrypted folder labeled Grandma's Estate Foreclosure right next to the bank statements I had photographed in my father's office. I uploaded another copy to an external hard drive, and I sent a third copy to a secure cloud server managed by my corporate legal team. Chad thought he was delivering a devastating blow to my ego. He thought he was putting me in my place and securing his spot as the wealthy patriarch of my family. He did not realize he had just handed a federal prosecuting attorney the exact piece of evidence needed to secure a 10-year prison sentence. The puzzle pieces were coming together perfectly on my monitors. The fake tears on TikTok, the public eviction on the front lawn, the stolen $2 million, and now the recorded confession. They were all so blinded by their own arrogance and their obsessive desire to see me fail that they did not bother to cover their tracks. They thought they were dealing with the helpless scapegoat who would just cry and walk away with $100 bill. They assumed I was too ignorant to understand property law. I closed the audio application and opened a new secure email draft. I typed in the address of a trusted contact I had at the Federal Bureau of Investigation White Collar Crime Division. The time for quietly collecting evidence in the shadows was officially over. It was time to start setting the legal charges for the explosion. 3 days before my father kicked me out on his Facebook livestream, I had already initiated the first phase of my counterattack. I walked through the revolving glass doors of the towering commercial bank headquarters in downtown Chicago. I was not wearing the oversized hoodies and faded jeans that my family had grown accustomed to seeing me in. I wore a tailored navy blue suit, my hair pulled back, and my leather briefcase gripped firmly in my hand. Security directed me to the executive elevators. I pressed the button for the 50th floor, which housed the Commercial Lending and Risk Management Division. This was the exact financial institution that had issued the $2 million development loan to my brother-in-law, Chad. They were the ones who sent the foreclosure notice to my father's house. When the polished steel doors slid open, I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway toward the main reception desk. I gave the receptionist my name, and within minutes I was escorted into a massive glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. Sitting across the mahogany table were 3 senior executives, including the director of risk management, a stern-looking man named Harrison. Harrison looked at me with a mixture of pity and extreme annoyance. He glanced down at the thick file folder in front of him, which bore my father's name and the address of my grandmother's 50-acre estate. Miss Maya Harrison began leaning forward and folding his hands on the table. "We appreciate you coming in, but I want to be transparent. If you are here to negotiate an extension on the loan your family acquired, the answer is firmly no. The account is 90 days past due. The project has shown zero development, and the funds have been completely depleted. We are proceeding with the foreclosure of the property next week. There is nothing you can say to change the standing of this debt." I did not interrupt him. I let him finish his rehearsed speech. When he was done, I reached into my tailored jacket pocket and pulled out my silver card case. I slid my thick embossed business card across the polished mahogany table. Harrison frowned and picked it up. His 2 colleagues leaned in closely to read it. "I am not here to beg for an extension, Harrison," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And I am certainly not here to represent my father or my brother-in-law. My name is Maya, and I am a senior forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud. I investigate complex financial crimes for a living. I audit institutions exactly like yours when they make catastrophic compliance failures." The temperature in the room seemed to drop immediately. The patronizing pity on Harrison's face vanished, replaced by a sudden sharp caution. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. I placed my briefcase on the table and popped the brass locks. I pulled out a thick stack of documents and spread them across the table. "I am here because your lending division authorized a $2 million commercial development loan against a property that was held in a family trust," I explained. "To legally leverage that asset, your underwriters required the notarized signatures of all 3 legal beneficiaries: my father, my sister, and myself." I slid a copy of the loan application toward Harrison, tapping my fingernail against the bottom of the 3rd page. "That is the signature your bank accepted as mine," I said. Beside it, I placed a certified copy of my passport, my state identification, and 3 filed tax returns. Now compare that signature to my actual legal signature. Notice the different angle of the letters and the hesitation marks in the ink. That is not my signature, Harrison. That is a blatant amateur forgery executed by my arrogant brother-in-law, Chad. The three executives stared at the documents in absolute silence. The color drained from Harrison's face. He realized exactly what I was telling him. His bank had disbursed $2 million based on fraudulent documents. You failed to perform basic due diligence. I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet conference room. Your underwriters failed to verify the physical identity of a primary trust beneficiary. You handed a massive sum to an unqualified investor using a forged deed. That means your current lien against my grandmother's property is legally invalid. If you attempt to foreclose on that land, I will tie this bank up in federal litigation for the next decade, and I will personally ensure your entire compliance department is investigated by federal regulators. Harrison swallowed hard. He looked at his colleagues, who were equally pale and silent. What exactly do you want from us, Miss Maya? He asked, his voice noticeably quieter than before. I smiled a cold, practiced smile. I do not want you to drop the foreclosure, I said. In fact, I want the foreclosure to proceed exactly as planned. But I do not want your bank owning the debt. Chad did not just forge my signature on the loan. He committed federal wire fraud by transferring portions of that money into unauthorized personal accounts, including a shadow charity fund controlled by my father. I am working with federal authorities to trace every dollar your bank wired to them. I have the paper trail. I packed my documents back into my briefcase and snapped it shut. I want to buy the toxic debt, I announced. I want your bank to quietly sell me the entire defaulted loan portfolio at a steep discount. You get to clear a fraudulent liability off your books before federal auditors find out how badly your team messed up. And I become the sole legal creditor of my father's estate and my brother-in-law's failed business. Harrison sat motionless, processing the sheer magnitude of the trap my family had fallen into. They thought they outsmarted a clueless relative, but they actually defrauded a financial assassin. I walked out of the towering glass building and stepped into the bustling Chicago streets, feeling a profound sense of clarity. The bank executives were terrified, and they had every right to be. Within 48 hours, my legal team would finalize the paperwork to quietly purchase the entire defaulted loan portfolio. But before I officially became my father's worst nightmare, I needed to know exactly where the stolen $2 million went. I returned to my penthouse, locked myself in my home office, and booted up my secure workstation. I had already forced Harrison to provide the complete disbursement records before I left his conference room. I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee and opened the sprawling digital ledger. It was time to follow the money. Tracing financial fraud is like untangling a massive knotted rope. Amateurs always think they are clever when they move money around, but they always leave a massive digital footprint. I started with the primary account, where the bank deposited the $2 million commercial development loan. Chad had registered a fake limited liability company with a sophisticated-sounding name to receive the funds. He claimed the money was exclusively for construction permits, architectural blueprints, and land clearing for his luxury wellness retreat. But the ledger told a completely different story. Not a single dollar ever went to a legitimate construction firm. Instead, within 48 hours of the loan clearing, Chad wired exactly $1.5 million to an offshore digital currency exchange. I hacked into the public blockchain ledgers and matched the wallet addresses from his bank transfers. My arrogant brother-in-law, the man who constantly lectured me about generational wealth and poverty mindsets, had dumped 75% of the family legacy into a highly volatile, untested cryptocurrency token. He thought he was a financial genius trying to double the money overnight before breaking ground on his fake wellness retreat. But the digital market crashed, completely wiping out the token's value in a matter of hours. I watched the transaction history as his $1.5 million investment plummeted to a worthless balance of less than $400. Chad had quite literally burned my grandmother's legacy to ashes in cyberspace. That explained the first massive portion of the missing funds, but there was still a huge discrepancy. There was exactly $500,000 left from the initial commercial loan. I clicked on the next line of the bank ledger, and my blood ran completely cold. Chad did not lose all the money in his crypto disaster. He had executed a secondary wire transfer just days after receiving the funds. The destination account was not registered to a business or an investment firm. It was wired directly to a local credit union account under the name of the Community Grace Charity Fund. I knew that name intimately. It was the private discretionary charity account controlled exclusively by my father, Reverend Calvin. My father had stood on his front lawn broadcasting to the world that I was a leech draining his resources. Meanwhile, he had quietly accepted $500,000 of stolen federal funds. I pulled up his personal financial records and cross-referenced the dates of the wire transfer. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. 2 weeks after the $500,000 hit his charity account, my father suddenly drove home in a brand new custom-tailored Mercedes-Benz. He claimed it was a blessed donation from an anonymous church benefactor. A month later, he renovated his pastoral office with imported Italian leather furniture and started wearing suits that cost more than my entire college tuition. The righteous reverend was funding his lavish lifestyle with stolen money. It sickened me to see the absolute hypocrisy of his actions. My father allowed my mother to suffer without proper medical care because he claimed the church was financially struggling. He kicked me out onto the street with absolutely nothing while preaching about the value of hard work. Yet he was perfectly willing to conspire with my sister's fraudulent husband to steal the family trust. He sold out his own blood for a luxury vehicle and a wardrobe upgrade. Chad bought his silence and cooperation with that $500,000 cut. My father signed over my grandmother's deed, knowing exactly what Chad intended to do. They were co-conspirators in a massive federal crime, and they thought they were untouchable. But the greed of amateur criminals always blinds them to the fine print. I pulled up the original loan application and scrutinized the collateral section. Chad needed $2 million fast, but commercial development loans require massive collateral. My grandmother's undeveloped land was not enough to secure the full amount on its own. So Chad and my father did the unthinkable. To guarantee the massive payout, my father quietly cross-collateralized the entire fraudulent bank loan. He pledged the deed to his own suburban home and the deed to the physical church building as secondary collateral. He literally bet the roof over his head and his entire congregation on Chad's fake real estate venture just so he could get a new car. They were so confident in their scheme that they ignored the catastrophic risk. The bank was not just going to seize my grandmother's 50 acres of empty land. The notice of default I had intercepted clearly stated that all collateralized assets were subject to immediate seizure. In exactly 2 weeks, the bank was legally authorized to begin foreclosure proceedings on the family home and padlock the doors of the church. My father was 14 days away from losing his house, his congregation, and his entire public reputation. And because I was now finalizing the purchase of that exact debt, I was the one holding the keys to his destruction. I owned the paper that could make him homeless. Their online echo chamber was about to become the venue of their ruin. Their online echo chamber was about to become the venue of their ruin. I opened my secure conference line. My corporate attorneys usually handled billion-dollar mergers, but today they worked on a personal project for me. I instructed Attorney Marcus to draft the debt assignment contract. I was buying the loan to assume absolute financial dictatorship over the people who tried to destroy me. Purchasing this portfolio required massive liquid capital. My family assumed I was broke because I avoided designer clothing. They did not know I spent years aggressively investing my high salary into real estate. I liquidated exactly $1.8 million in assets. The bank eagerly took a slight haircut on the principal to wash their hands of Chad's fraudulent nightmare. At 10 in the morning, my legal team initiated a secure video conference with Harrison and the bank's legal department. The tension on the screen was thick enough to cut with a knife. The banking executives knew they were caught in a massive federal compliance violation. If regulators discovered they approved a $2 million loan based on a single forged signature, their entire division would face catastrophic fines. I gave them a very simple, non-negotiable ultimatum: sell me the debt entirely and assign all collateral rights directly to my holding company. In exchange, I would sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement regarding their underwriting incompetence. Harrison looked like a man incredibly relieved. He agreed immediately, without trying to negotiate the price. Within 2 hours, the electronic wire transfer was complete. The massive sum of funds left my brokerage account and settled quietly into the bank's institutional ledger. By 3 in the afternoon, the digital ink was dry on the official assignment of debt. I printed the confirmation documents on my home printer. The warm pages slid out, carrying the weight of absolute authority. I picked up the heavy stack of papers and read through the legal jargon line by line. It was officially done. The National Bank was no longer the creditor. My private limited liability company, aptly named Pruned Branch Holdings, was now the sole legal owner of the $2 million debt. I sat back in my ergonomic desk chair and let the sheer reality of the situation wash over me. I was no longer the discarded scapegoat daughter begging for scraps of basic respect from a narcissistic father. I was no longer the target of a cheap smear campaign orchestrated by a jealous sister. I was the absolute legal master of their entire financial universe. I owned the primary promissory note on the 50-acre estate my grandmother had painstakingly acquired over her lifetime. I owned the primary mortgage lien on my father's sprawling suburban fortress. I even held the exclusive collateral rights to the physical building of the Community Grace Church. If my father missed a single scheduled payment, I had the legal right to change the locks on his sacred sanctuary and evict him from his own pulpit. And because the original loan was already 90 days in default, that right of eviction was active and enforceable immediately. While I was quietly orchestrating the greatest financial hostile takeover in my family's history, they were busy celebrating their imaginary victory online. I picked up my phone and checked my sister's social media. Destiny had just posted a new, highly filtered photo. She and Chad were standing in front of a luxury exotic car dealership. The caption read, "Shopping for the new company fleet. Big things are coming for our exclusive wellness retreat. God is always so good to those who hustle." I shook my head at the sheer breathtaking delusion. Chad had less than $400 left in his crypto wallet, and my father had blown the rest of the stolen cash on his custom Mercedes. They were completely broke and living entirely on borrowed time, but they were still trying to flex for their internet followers. My father was equally detached from reality. He posted a lengthy self-righteous sermon on his Facebook page about the biblical importance of cutting off toxic family members to protect your spiritual peace. Hundreds of his devoted church members were liking and sharing the post, praising his wisdom and pastoral strength. He was basking in the warm glow of his manufactured martyrdom, completely unaware that the daughter he just threw onto the concrete street now held the literal deed to the roof over his head. They were dancing happily on the deck of the Titanic, and I was the one holding the remote control to the iceberg. My lead attorney, Marcus, called me later that evening to confirm the final county filings had been registered with the clerk's office. "You are locked and loaded, Maya," he said, his voice laced with deep professional satisfaction. "You have full legal authorization to initiate immediate foreclosure and asset seizure at your complete discretion. How do you want to handle the service of process? Usually we send a standard process server to the residence, but given the highly fraudulent nature of the underlying collateral, we can also involve federal authorities right now." I looked at the sleek digital calendar on my desk. I did not want to just send a random process server to knock on their door on a quiet, boring Tuesday morning. That was far too easy. That would give them time to hide in their house, call sleazy lawyers, and spin a new victim narrative to the congregation. I needed a massive public venue. I needed an audience that rivaled the one my father had maliciously weaponized against me on his live stream. I needed to look them directly in the eye when I dropped the financial hammer. I told Marcus to hold the physical documents for now. I was going to deliver the notice of default personally. I hung up the phone and smiled. The trap was fully armed and I just needed the perfect occasion to spring it. The universe, as if reading my exact mind, delivered that perfect occasion the very next morning. The universe, as if reading my exact mind, delivered that perfect occasion the very next morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping a hot espresso and reviewing the digitized copies of the foreclosure documents, when my cell phone buzzed against the marble countertop. I glanced at the screen and saw my sister, Destiny's name. We had not spoken directly since the day I was humiliated on the front lawn. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. Destiny had not sent a text apologizing or checking on my well-being. Instead, she had sent a high-resolution image of an incredibly gaudy invitation. It was printed on heavy black cardstock with elaborate gold foil lettering that screamed new money. I zoomed in on the image to read the cursive text. The invitation was formally requesting my presence at the Community Grace Church 30th Anniversary Gala. But right below the church details was a second prominent announcement. The event was also serving as the official groundbreaking ceremony and investor reveal for the luxury wellness retreat, spearheaded by none other than my brother-in-law Chad. I stared at the image, letting the sheer audacity of the event sink in. My father and Chad were hosting a massive black tie gala to celebrate a church they were actively defrauding and a real estate project that did not actually exist. They had used the remaining stolen money to rent out the grand ballroom at the most expensive country club in the county. They were planning to stand in front of their congregation, the mayor and wealthy local donors, to flaunt their imaginary success. And my sister wanted to make sure I knew exactly what I was missing. Below the image of the invitation, Destiny had typed out a long paragraph. "Hey Maya," she wrote, her tone practically dripping with condescension through the screen. "I know, things have been really hard for you since Dad had to kick you out. We are hosting a massive gala this weekend for the church anniversary and Chad's new development project. Dad said you are still technically family, so you can come if you want to. But you have to stand in the back near the kitchen doors so you do not ruin the aesthetic for the photographers. Also, Chad told me to tell you that once the wellness retreat is built, he might be able to hire you as a janitor or a housekeeper. We know you are struggling to find work with that useless accounting degree, and we believe in giving second chances to people who hit rock bottom. Let me know if you need to borrow a dress. I have some old ones. I was going to donate to a charity bin anyway." I read the message twice. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. Instead, a deep, genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest and echoed through my empty penthouse. Destiny thought she was delivering a crushing blow to my self-esteem. She thought she was establishing her absolute dominance as the wealthy, successful golden child, throwing scraps to her impoverished older sister. She was offering me a job, cleaning toilets in a building that was never going to be built on land that she no longer owned. It was a fake peace offering designed entirely to humiliate me in front of hundreds of people. She wanted me to show up in a hand-me-down dress, stand in the shadows and watch them soak in the applause. She wanted to look down from the stage and see my defeated face. It was the most beautiful mistake she could have possibly made. I had been sitting in my office just last night, trying to figure out how to serve them the legal foreclosure papers in a way that would shatter their public facade. I wanted an audience, but I did not know how to gather one without tipping my hand. Now my sister had just handed me a golden ticket to the most public, heavily attended event of the year. They were gathering every single person they wanted to impress into one room. They were going to have microphones, cameras, and the undivided attention of the entire community. It was the perfect stage for an execution. I placed my espresso cup down on the counter and tapped the reply bar on my screen. I did not write a long emotional paragraph defending my career. I did not hurl insults or accuse her of being married to a criminal. I kept my response incredibly brief and completely devoid of emotion. "Thank you for the invitation," I typed. "I will definitely be there." I hit send and tossed the phone back onto the marble island. The game had officially changed. I walked back into my home office and looked at the stack of legal documents resting on my mahogany desk. The notice of default, the proof of the forged signatures, the wire transfer records showing my father buying a luxury car with stolen funds, and the deed assignment proving I was now the sole owner of all their physical assets. These papers were no longer just legal leverage, they were the main event. I picked up the documents and slid them into a sleek black leather portfolio. I was not going to stand in the back by the kitchen doors, and I certainly was not going to wear one of Destiny's discarded charity dresses. I opened my laptop to schedule a fitting at an exclusive designer boutique downtown. If I was going to crash a high-profile black tie gala, I was going to do it looking flawless and powerful. Then I sent a final secure message to my lead attorney and my federal contacts. This fake peace offering had truly just become the ultimate trap. My family wanted a grand, spectacular show, and I was going completely out of my way to give them a finale they would never, ever forget. 2 days before the gala, I walked into the sprawling glass-enclosed conference room at the offices of my corporate legal team. Marcus, my lead attorney, was already seated at the massive marble table. Sitting across from him was Special Agent Sterling, a seasoned investigator from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White-Collar Crime Division. I had worked with Sterling on several corporate embezzlement cases in the past. He knew my work ethic, and he knew that if I called him in for a meeting, I was not wasting his time. I set my sleek black leather portfolio on the table and took a seat. I did not bother with small talk. I opened the portfolio and slid 3 perfectly organized manila folders across the smooth marble surface. The first folder contains the forged commercial loan documents I explained, keeping my voice completely detached and professional. You will find the original deed to my grandmother's 50-acre estate, along with the notarized signatures. The signature belonging to me is a complete forgery executed by my brother-in-law, Chad. I have included certified copies of my actual legal signature for forensic comparison. The second folder contains the complete bank disbursement ledgers. Chad secured a $2 million commercial development loan using that forged deed. He immediately wired $1.5 million to an offshore cryptocurrency exchange, where it was subsequently lost in a massive market crash. Special Agent Sterling opened the folders and rapidly scanned the documents, his eyes darting across the highlighted bank routing numbers. "And the remaining $500,000, Sterling asked, without looking up from the paperwork. I slid the third folder toward him. "That is where my father, Reverend Calvin, enters the conspiracy," I said. Chad wired the remaining $500,000 directly into a private discretionary charity account controlled exclusively by my father. 2 weeks later, my father purchased a custom Mercedes-Benz and executed a massive renovation of his personal pastoral office. My father also cross-collateralized the fraudulent loan by pledging his suburban home and the physical church building as secondary backing. I watched as Sterling's expression shifted from professional curiosity to predatory focus. The paper trail was absolutely flawless. I had done the work of an entire federal accounting team in a matter of a few short weeks. "But I am not just here to hand you bank statements," I continued. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a secure encrypted flash drive. I placed it in the center of the marble table. That drive contains an audio recording I received directly from Chad. In it, he explicitly confesses to leveraging the deed without my permission. He openly admits to taking the $2 million and cutting me out of the family trust. Marcus plugged the drive into the conference room sound system. Chad's arrogant, condescending voice suddenly echoed through the room. We sat in silence, listening to him lecture me about generational wealth and explicitly admit to committing federal wire fraud. When the audio finished playing, the room was completely quiet. Sterling leaned back in his chair and let out a low breath. "You really handed him enough rope to hang himself, Maya," he said, shaking his head. "But here is the part that you do not know. Sterling opened his own briefcase and pulled out a thick file branded with the Federal Bureau seal. "We have been quietly looking into Chad for the last 8 months. Your brother-in-law is not just an arrogant amateur who got greedy with a family property. He has been running a massive real estate Ponzi scheme across 3 state lines. He takes money from new investors to pay fake dividends to older investors. His crypto crash last month completely drained his liquidity. He was desperate. That $2 million loan he stole from your family was a frantic attempt to plug the massive holes in his sinking ship." I absorbed this new information without flinching. It made perfect sense. The aggressive lectures, the fake luxury lifestyle, the desperate need to look successful. It was all a house of cards waiting to collapse. "So what is the next step?" I asked, looking directly at Sterling. The agent tapped his pen against the table. "With this audio confession and the forged documents you just provided, we have more than enough probable cause to secure immediate federal arrest warrants," he explained. "A judge will sign off on this by tomorrow morning. We were planning to pick him up at his house later this week, but I want to minimize the risk of him fleeing or destroying evidence. We need to know his exact schedule." This was the moment I had been waiting for. I reached into my portfolio one last time and pulled out the thick black cardstock invitation my sister had sent me. I slid it across the table toward the federal agent. "You do not need to go to his house," I said, a slow smile finally breaking across my face. "Tomorrow night, Chad and my father are hosting a massive black tie gala at the Belmont Country Club. It is a dual celebration for the church anniversary and the official groundbreaking of Chad's fake wellness retreat. They have invited the mayor, the city council, and hundreds of wealthy private donors. It is going to be the biggest social event of the season." Sterling picked up the gaudy invitation and read the cursive gold lettering. A genuine smile spread across the federal agent's face. A ballroom full of potential victims and co-conspirators all gathered in one room, wearing their best formal wear, Sterling mused. "It is incredibly generous of them to organize all of our suspects into one convenient location. I will coordinate with the regional SWAT division and the local financial crimes task force. We will execute the arrest warrants tomorrow night right in the middle of their grand presentation." Marcus closed his legal pad and adjusted his glasses. "And while the Federal Bureau is placing them in handcuffs, Maya will personally serve the foreclosure notices on the property," he added. "We have legally acquired the debt. The trap is completely inescapable." I stood up from the marble table. The calm before the storm was officially over. Tomorrow night I was going to burn their entire fake kingdom to the ground. The actual morning of the gala arrived with a quiet stillness. I woke up in my penthouse and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the waking city. For the past 3 months, I had played the role of the defeated daughter perfectly. I had worn oversized hoodies and faded jeans to blend into the background while my sister flaunted her designer labels. I had kept my head down and my voice low. But that version of me was officially dead and buried. Today, I was stepping back into my actual skin. I went into my massive walk-in closet and bypassed the casual clothes I had used as my disguise. Hanging securely in a dark protective garment bag was the weapon I had chosen for the evening. It was not a hand-me-down dress from my sister, and it certainly was not the uniform of a janitor. It was a stunning custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, crafted in a shade of deep blood red. I unzipped the bag and ran my hand over the immaculate fabric. The striking color was entirely intentional. It was aggressive and unapologetic. It was the color of a woman who was absolutely in control of her environment. I spent the next 2 hours transforming myself. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, tight style that left my face completely exposed. I applied a sharp, minimalist makeup look, focusing on a bold red lip that perfectly matched the suit. When I finally slipped into the tailored trousers and the perfectly fitted jacket, I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a senior corporate auditor who dismantled fraudulent empires. I looked powerful and dangerous, completely unrecognizable from the broken woman they thought they had discarded onto the concrete driveway. I walked out of my closet and picked up the black leather portfolio resting on my mahogany desk. Inside were the foreclosure notices, The forged deed, the bank ledgers, and the final assignment of debt. They carried the weight of absolute financial ruin for the people who had tried to destroy me. I carefully slid the portfolio under my arm, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of readiness. Just as I was checking my watch, my phone began to vibrate violently on the marble kitchen island. I walked over and looked at the glowing screen. It was a barrage of text messages from Aunt Denise. Even though I had blocked her previous number, she had managed to borrow my Uncle Robert's phone just to harass me before the event. She could not resist playing the family enforcer. I opened the message thread and read through the long paragraphs of toxic warnings. Maya. I know Destiny invited you out of the goodness of her heart, Aunt Denise wrote, but you need to understand your place tonight. Your father has important city officials and wealthy donors attending. Chad is about to launch a multi-million-dollar real estate project that will bless this entire family. Do not do anything to embarrass the Reverend or the rest of us. You need to come in quietly through the side entrance and stay in the back near the catering staff. Do not try to mingle with the important guests, and do not talk about your unemployment. We are already dealing with enough stress without you ruining the aesthetic of the evening. Just be grateful they are even letting you breathe the same air as successful people. I read the messages and felt absolutely nothing but a cold surgical calm. Aunt Denise was so entirely blinded by her devotion to my father's fake image that she could not even fathom the reality of the situation. She genuinely believed that Chad was a visionary entrepreneur and that I was a pathetic charity case. She was trying to protect a glass house while I was standing outside holding a massive boulder. I did not write a long emotional paragraph defending myself. I did not try to explain that the multi-million-dollar project was actually a massive federal crime. I just tapped the screen and typed a single short reply. Do not worry, Aunt Denise, I am just bringing some paperwork. I hit send and immediately blocked Uncle Robert's number as well. I turned off the notifications on my phone and dropped it into my pocket. The time for talking was completely over. I walked out of my penthouse and took the private elevator down to the lobby. The same sleek black luxury vehicle that had picked me up from my father's front lawn was waiting for me at the curb. The driver opened the door and I slid into the quiet leather interior. We merged onto the highway heading toward the Belmont Country Club. The drive took exactly 45 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime of preparation, culminating in this single night. I spent the entire smooth ride looking out the tinted window, watching the bright city lights blur past me. I went over the sequence of events in my mind. Special Agent Sterling and his federal task force were already in position waiting for my signal. My lead attorney Marcus was on standby to file the final electronic injunctions the moment the handcuffs clicked. My family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small and insignificant. They thought they could throw me away and build a fake legacy on top of my stolen inheritance. As the luxury vehicle pulled through the massive wrought iron gates of the exclusive country club, I saw the grand ballroom brilliantly illuminated against the dark night sky. Valet attendants were rushing to park expensive cars and guests in formal wear were walking up the grand staircase. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting the lapels of my blood-red suit. The grand stage was perfectly set, and the ultimate predator had officially arrived to collect her due. I walked up the grand stone steps of the Belmont Country Club, feeling the heavy mahogany doors yield to the uniformed staff who pulled them open. The immediate wave of air conditioning carried the scent of expensive floral arrangements and roasted tenderloin. The grand ballroom was a spectacle of stolen wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over 300 of the city's most influential residents. I saw the mayor shaking hands near the champagne fountain. I saw the wealthy private donors who funded my father's church, standing in small circles laughing and sipping top-shelf liquor. There were massive glossy banners positioned around the perimeter, displaying architectural renderings of Chad's imaginary luxury wellness retreat. It was a masterclass in visual deception. My father and my brother-in-law had spent thousands of dollars of stolen federal funds just to convince these people to hand over even more money. They were playing a high-stakes game of smoke and mirrors, and I was the only person in the room holding a giant fan. I stepped fully into the ballroom, and the impact of my custom blood-red suit was instantaneous. In a sea of conservative black tuxedos and muted pastel evening gowns, I looked like a walking warning sign. The conversations near the entrance abruptly stopped. Heads began to turn, and the sudden silence rippled outward like a stone dropped into a quiet pond. I saw Aunt Denise standing near the dessert table. Her jaw practically unhinged when she recognized me. She had expected a broken woman sneaking through the kitchen doors in a charity bin dress. Instead, she was looking at an apex predator. The whispers started immediately. I could hear the hushed voices of my cousins and church members spreading the gossip as I walked confidently across the plush carpet. My posture was perfectly straight, and I held my black leather portfolio loosely at my side. I did not look at the floor. I made direct eye contact with anyone who dared to stare. Before I could reach the center of the room, two figures stepped directly into my path, intentionally blocking my progression toward the main seating area. It was Destiny and Chad. Destiny was wearing an overly embellished silver gown that looked more appropriate for a beauty pageant than a corporate launch. Chad wore a velvet tuxedo jacket that screamed desperation. His face was flushed with anger and panic. "What are you doing here, Maya?" he demanded, keeping his voice low, but completely laced with venom. "We told you to stay in the back. You are making a spectacle of yourself." Destiny crossed her arms, her diamond ring catching the light. "I cannot believe you actually showed up," she sneered, looking me up and down. "And what is this outfit? Did you spend your last unemployment check trying to look rich? You look ridiculous." Chad stepped closer, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. He leaned in so only the three of us could hear his next words. "Renting designer clothes will not hide the fact that you are broke, Maya," he scoffed. "I know exactly how much money you have, and it is nothing. You do not belong here with these investors. You are a liability to my brand. Turn around and walk out before I have security physically remove you from the premises." I did not step back. I did not flinch. I looked at Chad's sweating forehead and then at Destiny's fake eyelashes. I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. "I am not wearing rented clothes, Chad," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. "And you do not have a brand. You have a criminal record waiting to happen. I suggest you go enjoy your champagne while you still have hands free to hold the glass." Destiny gasped at my tone, but before she could formulate a response, I simply stepped around them. I did not ask for their permission to move, and I did not give them another second of my attention. I continued my walk through the ballroom, navigating through the sea of confused faces. I spotted my father standing on the raised stage at the front of the room. He was adjusting his microphone and smiling warmly at the mayor. He looked incredibly proud of himself. He had built this entire evening to stroke his own massive ego and secure his position as the patriarch of a successful, wealthy dynasty. He had completely ignored the fact that his legacy was built on fraud, forgery, and the absolute betrayal of his eldest daughter. He was shaking hands with wealthy patrons, acting like a holy man, while his pockets were lined with stolen federal cash. I found an empty table situated directly in the center of the room, perfectly aligned with the center podium on the stage. I sat down in the plush velvet chair and placed my black leather portfolio on the white tablecloth right next to the crystal water goblet. Several church members sitting at the adjacent tables stared at me uncomfortably, but I simply offered them a polite nod. I slowly checked my gold watch. The time was perfectly aligned. Special Agent Sterling and his team were currently staging outside the perimeter of the country club, waiting for my signal. I looked around the room, analyzing the exits and the security presence. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. The orchestral music playing softly in the background suddenly faded out, and the ballroom lights dimmed. A single bright spotlight hit the center of the stage, illuminating my father as he stepped up to the podium. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. The main event was finally beginning, and they had absolutely no idea that I was the one now controlling the entire script. This was the exact moment my family would finally learn the true cost of their blinding arrogance and their endless cruel betrayal. The ballroom grew entirely quiet as my father tapped the microphone. The sound echoed off the crystal chandeliers and the velvet-draped walls. He stood behind the heavy oak podium, looking out over the sea of wealthy donors and city officials. He began his speech with his signature deep pastoral voice. He welcomed the mayor and thanked the local politicians for their continued support of the Community Grace Church. He spoke eloquently about the importance of family and the divine calling to build a lasting legacy. He gestured dramatically toward the glossy banners displaying Chad's fake luxury wellness retreat. He called it a vision of generational wealth and a testament to the hard work of his youngest daughter, Destiny, and her brilliant husband, Chad. The crowd clapped politely, and my father soaked in the adulation. He was entirely in his element, performing for a room full of people he believed he had successfully fooled. But as his eyes swept across the grand ballroom, his gaze suddenly caught the vibrant blood-red fabric of my suit. I was sitting perfectly still in the absolute center of the room. My father stopped speaking mid-sentence. His pastoral smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he recognized me. He clearly had not expected me to actually show up, and he certainly had not expected me to look like a high-powered executive. I saw the gears turning in his head. He had two choices. He could ignore me and continue his scripted presentation, or he could use my presence to further elevate his own self-righteous image. Because he is a complete narcissist, he chose the latter. He gripped the edges of the podium and leaned closer to the microphone. A wide, condescending smile spread across his face. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a surprise guest joining us tonight," he announced, his voice booming through the massive speakers. "It looks like my prodigal daughter has returned." The crowd murmured and hundreds of heads turned to look at my table. My father did not break eye contact with me. As a pastor, I teach my congregation about the boundless nature of grace. He continued, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Sometimes we have to make the agonizing decision to practice tough love. Just a few weeks ago, I had to ask my eldest daughter, Maya, to leave our home. She had lost her way. She was struggling with severe unemployment, a lack of ambition, and a toxic mindset of entitlement. She chose to leech off her parents instead of contributing to society." A wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the ballroom. Some of the church elders nodded in solemn agreement, while the wealthy investors looked at me with open pity. I glanced over at the VIP table near the front. Destiny was covering her mouth, trying to hide a massive smirk. Chad was leaning back in his chair, looking incredibly pleased with himself. They thought my father was delivering the ultimate public humiliation. They thought this was the final nail in the coffin of my reputation. My father raised his hand to quiet the crowd. He wanted to make sure every single person in the room heard his next words. "But as I said, our church is built on forgiveness," he preached. "Maya, I am glad you found a way to get here tonight, even if you had to borrow that suit to do it. We love you, and we want you to heal. In fact, I think this is a profound opportunity for spiritual growth. Maya, I want you to come up here to this stage right now. I want you to publicly apologize to your sister and your brother-in-law for disrespecting their vision. I want you to ask this congregation for their prayers so you can finally find a job and become a productive member of our family." The sheer audacity of his demand hung heavily in the air. He was ordering me to walk up to the stage and beg for forgiveness in front of the mayor and 300 wealthy donors. He was trying to force my absolute submission. The entire ballroom was completely silent, waiting to see what the broken, unemployed daughter would do. They expected me to shrink down in my chair. They expected me to run crying toward the exit out of sheer embarrassment. Aunt Denise was nodding vigorously from across the room, silently demanding that I obey my father. I did not shrink, and I did not run. I let the silence stretch for a few more agonizing seconds. Then I slowly reached across the white tablecloth and picked up my heavy black leather portfolio. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The blood-red fabric of my suit caught the stage lights. I did not look at the floor. I kept my eyes locked directly on my father. I stepped away from the table and began walking down the center aisle toward the raised stage. The rhythmic sound of my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor echoed clearly in the quiet room. My father watched me approach with a look of supreme triumph. He actually believed he had won. He stepped back, extending his hand in a gesture of fake paternal warmth. Destiny clapped mockingly from her front seat. Chad simply sneered. They had perfectly set the stage for their own destruction. I reached the bottom of the carpeted stairs. I walked up the steps with the calculated pace of an auditor entering a corrupt boardroom. I stood on the elevated platform looking out over the massive crowd. I was standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who had thrown me onto the street. I stopped directly in front of the heavy oak podium. I placed my black leather portfolio firmly on the wooden surface. I turned my head and looked directly into my father's confident eyes. The time for his fake sermons was completely over. I reached out and took the microphone firmly from his grasp. His fingers instinctively tightened around the sleek metal cylinder for a split second before my unwavering glare forced him to release it. He stepped to the side, maintaining his practiced smile, but his eyes betrayed a sudden flash of genuine uncertainty. He expected a weeping, broken apology. He expected me to stare at my shoes and beg for a place back in his house. Instead, I adjusted the microphone stand to my height and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. The massive ballroom was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents. 300 pairs of eyes were locked onto my blood-red suit. The mayor shifted in his seat. The wealthy donors leaned forward. Aunt Denise stood frozen by the dessert table. "Good evening, everyone!" I said, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully across the massive room. It did not shake, it did not waver. I want to thank Reverend Calvin for that incredibly creative introduction. It is true that I am his eldest daughter, Maya. But I am not here tonight to apologize for my supposed lack of ambition. And I am certainly not here to beg for a job cleaning the imaginary floors of a wellness retreat. I am here to talk about something my brother-in-law Chad is incredibly passionate about. I looked directly at the VIP table in the front row. Destiny had dropped her smirk. Chad was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white against the white linen. "Chad, I want to publicly thank you," I continued, gesturing slightly toward him. "For years you have taken every available opportunity to lecture me about the concept of generational wealth. You told me that poor people work for money, but wealthy people make money work for them. You taught me about leverage. You explained how true visionaries take dormant assets and use them to build massive financial empires. You told me that the future belongs to the risk-takers, while people like me who just crunch numbers on spreadsheets are destined to be left behind." I paused, letting his own arrogant philosophies hang in the heavy air. The crowd murmured in confusion. This was not the speech of a defeated woman asking for charity. Some of the investors nodded slowly, thinking I was genuinely praising Chad's business acumen. Chad glared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He knew something was terribly wrong, but he was trapped in his seat, surrounded by the very people he was trying to impress. My father stepped forward slightly, raising a hand to interrupt. "Maya, this is not the time for," he started, but I immediately cut him off by raising my own hand, silencing him instantly. "I am not finished, Reverend." I snapped my tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. I turned back to the audience. "Yes, Chad taught me a lot about leverage," I said, pacing slowly across the elevated stage. "But what Chad failed to understand is that I do not just crunch numbers on spreadsheets. I am a senior forensic accountant. My entire career is dedicated to auditing multinational corporations and tracking down executives who use that exact same leverage to commit massive financial crimes." A collective gasp rippled through the front rows. The mayor stopped chewing his prime rib. The wealthy church donors exchanged alarmed glances. Destiny looked wildly at her husband, her fake eyelashes fluttering in panic. My father took a step back, his face draining of all color. The glossy banners displaying the luxury wellness retreat suddenly seemed to mock the tension in the room. I walked back to the heavy oak podium. I placed my hands on the brass locks of my black leather portfolio. The sharp click of the lock snapping open echoed sharply through the microphone. I opened the leather flap and pulled out the thick stack of meticulously organized legal documents. I held them up for the entire ballroom to see. These papers are the actual foundation of the Community Grace Wellness Retreat, I announced, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Chad told you all that he was building a legacy. He told you he had secured millions of dollars in legitimate funding to break ground on a state-of-the-art facility. He asked you for your investments, your donations, and your absolute trust. But Chad did not secure a legitimate loan. He stole it. The silence in the ballroom was suddenly replaced by a rising tide of shocked whispers. People were sitting up straight, completely abandoning their expensive dinners. "What are you talking about, Maya?" my father hissed, grabbing my arm. I pulled my arm away violently. "Do not touch me," I warned him quietly, before turning my attention back to the microphone. In order to get the $2 million commercial loan for this project, Chad needed collateral, I explained to the captivated audience. He used the 50-acre estate my grandmother left to our family trust. But he did not have the legal right to use it. So he forged my signature on federal bank documents. He committed identity theft and federal wire fraud to secure the money. Chad jumped out of his chair, pointing a trembling finger at the stage. "She is lying," he screamed, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. "She is a jealous, bitter liar trying to ruin my company. Someone get security to throw her out right now." But nobody moved. The security guards standing near the exits looked at the mayor and then back at the stage, completely unsure of what to do. I did not even raise my voice to shout over him. I simply pulled the first certified document from the stack. "I have the forensic proof right here, Chad," I said, tapping the paper. "I have the forged deed. I have the bank ledgers showing exactly where the money went." I turned to the audio-visual booth located at the back of the room. I had personally visited the venue earlier that afternoon and paid the lead technician an extra $500 in cash to ensure my encrypted flash drive was securely loaded into their projection system. I caught his eye across the massive room and gave him a single sharp nod. The giant digital projector mounted on the ceiling immediately hummed to life. The glossy architectural renderings of Chad's fake luxury wellness retreat completely vanished from the massive screen behind the stage. In their place, a high-definition scan of a formal commercial bank document appeared, illuminating the entire stage, and the front rows in a harsh, bright white light. The header read, "Notice of Default and Foreclosure," in bold, striking red letters. The crowd collectively gasped as the details of the document became legible. I stepped to the side of the oak podium, ensuring that my father and Chad had a completely unobstructed view of their own financial death warrant. "This legal document was issued by the Commercial Lending Division just last week," I announced, my voice echoing powerfully through the microphone. "It outlines the catastrophic failure of the $2 million loan Chad fraudulently acquired using my forged signature. He did not use a single penny of that money to buy construction permits or hire architects for this imaginary wellness retreat. He wired $1.5 million to an offshore cryptocurrency exchange, where he lost every single cent in less than 48 hours in a volatile market crash." I pressed a button on the remote control in my hand, and the massive screen behind me instantly switched to a high-resolution screenshot of the blockchain ledger. It highlighted the exact transaction and the devastating total loss. "You are all looking at the digital ashes of my grandmother's legacy," I declared. But Chad did not act alone. I continued, my voice rising steadily above the rapidly growing murmur of the shocked crowd. He needed a co-conspirator. He needed someone on the inside to turn a blind eye to the forgery and facilitate the transfer of the physical deed. I clicked the remote again to reveal the next slide. A detailed bank transfer receipt appeared on the screen, showing exactly $500,000 moving into a local credit union account. "That specific account belongs exclusively to the Community Grace Charity Fund," I explained, pointing at the highlighted routing number. It is a private discretionary account, controlled entirely by my father, Reverend Calvin. He accepted $500,000 of stolen federal funds to finance his brand new custom Mercedes-Benz, his lavish office renovations, and his imported tailored suits. He literally stood on his front lawn and publicly called me a lazy leech while his own pockets were overflowing with stolen cash. And to secure this massive fraudulent payout, he cross-collateralized the entire commercial loan. He pledged the deed to our family home and the deed to this very church building as secondary backing. As of 9 o'clock this morning, those loans have officially defaulted. The grand ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The polite murmurs morphed instantly into furious shouts of outrage and absolute disbelief. Wealthy investors who had already written substantial checks for the fake wellness retreat began standing up and angrily demanding answers from anyone who would listen. The mayor of the city immediately stood up from his prime seat in the front row. He buttoned his suit jacket with a grim expression and briskly walked out the nearest side door, flanked tightly by his security detail. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with a public federal financial crime. My father gripped the edges of the heavy oak podium, his knuckles turning completely white. His mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out over the roar of the crowd. His pristine pastoral facade had entirely shattered. Chad completely lost whatever remaining shreds of sanity and self-control he possessed. He shoved his dining chair back so violently that it crashed heavily into the table behind him, knocking over a silver ice bucket. He charged blindly toward the stage, his face contorted in an ugly mask of absolute desperate rage. "You are a pathological liar," he screamed, sprinting recklessly up the carpeted stairs. He reached out aggressively, trying to rip the microphone from my hand. "You fabricated all of this evidence. You hacked those banking documents. Nobody in this room is going to believe a fired bitter accountant over a successful entrepreneur. I am a visionary. I am building a legitimate empire. Security, get this crazy woman out of here right now." Two venue security guards finally jogged toward the stage, but they stopped abruptly at the bottom of the stairs, completely unsure of who they were actually supposed to apprehend. I did not step back, and I certainly did not surrender the microphone. I looked at Chad, who was panting heavily, his expensive velvet tuxedo jacket now completely ruined by his own panicked sweat. I let him scream his pathetic threats until his lungs burned. Then I raised the microphone back to my lips. "You are right about exactly one thing, Chad," I said, my voice slicing cleanly through the deafening chaos of the ballroom like a surgical blade. "I am an accountant, which means I know exactly how to read the fine print." The commercial bank was absolutely terrified when I showed their risk management team your amateur forged signature. They knew federal regulators would destroy their entire division for authorizing that massive loan without proper due diligence. So I offered their executives a highly mutually beneficial solution. I clicked the remote control one final time. The massive screen behind me shifted to display a formal assignment of debt contract. It prominently bore my legal holding company name and the official stamped seal of the county clerk. "I bought the toxic debt, Chad," I announced, dropping the final devastating hammer. My voice boomed with absolute, undeniable authority. "I liquidated my private real estate portfolios, and I purchased your defaulted commercial loan at a premium. The National Bank is no longer your creditor. I am. I am the sole legal owner of the $2 million debt. I own the primary promissory note on my grandmother's 50-acre estate. I own the primary mortgage lien on my father's suburban house, and I hold the exclusive enforceable collateral rights to the physical building of the Community Grace Church." Chad stared at the glowing screen, his eyes wide with a terror so pure and absolute, it was almost beautiful to witness. My father collapsed backward into the chair behind the podium, burying his face in his trembling hands as the reality of his impending homelessness crashed down upon him. Destiny began to wail loudly from the front row, a horrific, high-pitched sound of pure, unfiltered defeat and humiliation. Aunt Denise had slumped heavily against the dessert table, clutching her chest as her entire fabricated social hierarchy dissolved before her eyes. "You told me I was completely cut out of the family legacy, Chad," I said, staring directly into his panicked, bloodshot eyes. "You told me I did not belong here and that I should enjoy living on the streets. But you are currently standing inside a building that legally belongs to me. You are all trespassing on my property." Total pandemonium instantly consumed the Belmont Country Club. Private donors were storming the stage, shouting furiously at my father and demanding their investment money back immediately. Senior church elders were screaming at Chad, calling him a fraud and a thief. Panicked waiters dropped heavy silver trays of champagne glasses, shattering expensive crystal across the polished hardwood floor. The massive glossy banners displaying the fake luxury wellness retreat were violently knocked over and trampled underfoot by angry, furious guests rushing toward the exit doors. I stood completely still in the absolute center of the stage, perfectly calm, amidst the massive destruction I had just unleashed upon them. I placed the microphone gently back onto the metal stand and picked up my black leather portfolio. The brutal truth was finally out, and my financial trap had violently and permanently snapped shut around their throats. My father, desperate to regain control of his crumbling kingdom, lunged forward and snatched the microphone from the metal stand. He tapped it furiously, sending a loud screech of feedback through the massive speakers. "Everyone please calm down," he shouted. "This is a minor clerical error. My daughter is suffering from a mental breakdown, and we will handle this internally. I implore you all to return to your seats." But the crowd was not listening. Investors demanded their checks back. His words were abruptly cut short by a massive booming sound from the back of the room. The heavy oak doors of the Belmont Country Club Grand Ballroom burst open, with enough force to shatter the brass handles. 12 federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers with the yellow letters FBI printed across their backs swarmed into the room. They moved with terrifying precision. Special Agent Sterling walked at the front of the formation, holding up his gold badge. Federal Agent Sterling announced, his voice projecting over the chaos without needing a microphone. "Nobody move." The entire ballroom froze. The furious shouts of the investors turned into stunned gasps. The mayor, who was already halfway out a side door, took one look at the federal jackets and immediately threw his hands up in the air, desperate to distance himself from the situation. Chad took one look at Special Agent Sterling and made the worst possible decision. He turned around and tried to sprint toward the kitchen service doors behind the main stage. He did not make it past the dessert table. 2 federal agents intercepted him instantly, tackling him hard onto the polished hardwood floor. A massive tiered chocolate cake crashed down around them, ruining his velvet tuxedo jacket for a second time. "Let me go!" Chad screamed, struggling wildly against the agents. "I am a legitimate businessman. I know my rights. You cannot do this to me. I am building a legacy." His arrogant lectures about generational wealth were suddenly replaced by the sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists. The agents hauled him forcefully to his feet. "Chad, you are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and operating an illegal Ponzi scheme," Sterling stated coldly, reading the charges loud enough for the entire room to hear. Destiny, who had been frozen in her front row seat, suddenly sprang to life. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream and ran toward her husband. "Chad," she shrieked, grabbing at the federal agent's arms. "Let him go. He is innocent. My sister set him up. She is just jealous of us." One of the agents gently but firmly pushed her back. Destiny collapsed onto her knees right in the middle of the ballroom floor. She began to sob uncontrollably. The thick black mascara she had carefully applied for the photographers was now running down her face in dark, ugly streaks, staining her expensive silver gown. She looked completely pathetic, stripped of all her fake glamour and internet prestige. The golden child was finally experiencing the real-world consequences of her absolute entitlement. Special Agent Sterling did not spare her a second glance. He left Chad with the arresting officers and walked deliberately up the carpeted stairs to the main stage. My father was still clutching the microphone, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a massive freight train. Reverend Calvin Sterling said, his tone devoid of any respect or sympathy. "We need you to come with us immediately. We have a federal warrant to detain you for questioning regarding your direct involvement in a conspiracy to commit bank fraud and the unlawful receipt of $500,000 in stolen funds." My father dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage floor with a loud thud. "I am a man of God," my father stammered, taking a weak step backward. "I am the spiritual leader of this community. I did not know where that money came from. Chad told me it was a donation. I am completely innocent." Sterling pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. It was a printed copy of the encrypted audio file I had provided. "You can tell that to the federal prosecutor," Reverend Sterling replied. "We have an audio recording of your son-in-law explicitly stating that you signed the forged deed over to him. You are coming with us right now. Do not make us put you in handcuffs in front of your congregation." Two agents flanked my father, grabbing him firmly by the arms. The powerful, wealthy patriarch who had publicly evicted me on a live stream was now being escorted off his own stage like a common criminal. The church members watched in absolute stunned silence as their beloved pastor was marched down the center aisle. Aunt Denise was sitting in a chair holding a napkin to her chest, breathing heavily as she watched her entire worldview collapse. I stepped down from the stage, walking carefully down the carpeted stairs. I did not feel pity. I did not feel regret. I felt an overwhelming sense of profound justice. The chaos in the ballroom was beginning to subside, replaced by the stark reality of the federal raid. The investors were already talking to the remaining agents, filing official victim reports. I walked past the overturned tables and the shattered crystal. A terrified waiter had abandoned a silver tray on a nearby cocktail table. There was a single untouched glass of vintage champagne resting on the polished metal. I picked up the delicate crystal glass. I turned around and watched as the federal agents pushed Chad and my father through the shattered oak doors and out into the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting police cruisers. Destiny was still wailing on the floor, completely ignored by everyone she had previously looked down upon. I raised the glass of champagne slightly in a silent toast to the incredible efficiency of the federal justice system. I took a slow, satisfying sip. The bitter vintage tasted absolutely perfect. I had promised them a grand finale, and I had delivered exactly what they deserved. 48 hours after the federal raid shattered the grand ballroom, my penthouse apartment was perfectly quiet. I sat on my velvet sofa, bathed in the soft morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I held a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand and my unlocked smartphone in the other. The notification icon on my screen displayed a bright red circle with the number 84 inside it. 84 missed calls, text messages, and frantic voicemails, all received since the moment my father and Chad were shoved into the back of those federal police cruisers. The sheer volume of panic emanating from my family was staggering. The people who had so gleefully participated in my public roast just 2 weeks ago were now desperately scrambling to save themselves from the fallout. My father was currently sitting in a federal holding cell, waiting for his bail hearing, while the commercial bank scrambled to cooperate with investigators. The story had already made the front page of the local newspaper. Prominent local pastor and son-in-law arrested in massive real estate fraud scheme. The headline was absolutely beautiful. I tapped the voicemail icon and began listening to the messages. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt a deep clinical curiosity. I wanted to hear exactly how quickly their arrogance dissolved when faced with real consequences. The first few messages were from distant cousins demanding an explanation. Then came the messages from church elders oscillating between begging for my mercy and threatening me with divine retribution. I deleted them all without a second thought. But then I saw a new incoming call flashing on the screen. It was Aunt Denise calling from yet another burner phone. She had been the loudest voice in the digital choir of insults. She had ordered me to stay by the kitchen doors and act like a peasant at the gala. Now she was calling me relentlessly. I decided it was time to finally answer. I pressed the green button and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just let the line open. Maya, oh my God, Maya, please tell me you are there. Aunt Denise sobbed into the receiver. Her voice was completely ragged. She sounded like she had not slept in 2 days. The shrill condescension she usually carried was entirely gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered terror. I am here, Aunt Denise, I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I am just enjoying a quiet morning. How are things at the church? My casual tone seemed to push her over the edge. Things are completely destroyed, she wailed. The congregation is in an absolute panic. The bank sent an eviction crew this morning. They are literally changing the locks on the sanctuary doors right now. And they sent agents to your father's house. They are forcing your mother to pack a single suitcase and leave the premises by noon. Maya, they are evicting your parents. You have to stop this. You have to call your lawyers and drop the charges. You have to give the church back. He is your father. I pulled my tablet from the coffee table and woke up the screen. I opened the encrypted folder labeled The Echo Chamber, where I had stored all the high-resolution screenshots from the Facebook live stream. I scrolled past Cousin Marcus and Aunt Sarah until I found the exact image I was looking for. Aunt Denise. I am not the federal prosecutor, I explained calmly. I cannot drop criminal charges against a man who committed wire fraud. The federal government is handling that. But regarding the eviction, you are absolutely right. I am the legal owner of the property now. My holding company authorized the lock change. It is standard procedure for foreclosed commercial assets. But you cannot do this to your own family. Aunt Denise screamed, her voice cracking. You are being cruel and vindictive. God is going to punish you for destroying this family. We took you in when you had nothing. We prayed for you. You owe us your respect. I set my coffee mug down. The hypocrisy was so thick, I could practically choke on it. I owe you nothing, I stated, my voice dropping an octave. But since you brought up God, let us revisit your theology, Aunt Denise. I tapped the image on my tablet and read her own words back to her. A week ago, you commented on a video of my father throwing my clothes onto the driveway. You wrote that sometimes God requires us to prune the dead branches. You wrote that sometimes God removes the weeds so the flowers can truly bloom. Do you remember writing that, Auntie? There was a sudden suffocating silence on the other end of the line. She knew exactly what she had written. She just never expected to be held accountable for it. You all agreed that I was a weed. I continued, the cold truth ringing through the quiet penthouse. You all agreed that I was a toxic presence ruining the beautiful garden my father and Chad were building. You told me to stand in the back near the kitchen doors, so I would not ruin the aesthetic of their grand success. Well, Aunt Denise, it turns out the garden was fake. The flowers were actually federal criminals, and the weed just bought the entire property. I am not being vindictive. I am just following your excellent advice. You said God removes the weeds. I am just doing the gardening. Maya. Please, Aunt Denise whispered, her voice breaking completely. Your mother has nowhere to go. I tapped the red button on the screen, ending the call instantly. Click. I tossed the burner phone number into the blocked list along with all the others. They expected me to rescue them from the fire they had deliberately set to burn me alive. They wanted the benefits of family loyalty while actively participating in my destruction. I stood up from the sofa and walked back to the window. The city below was moving fast, completely unbothered by the dramatic collapse of Reverend Calvin's fake empire. I had permanently severed the toxic roots that tied me to those people. There was only one loose end left to tie up, and she was already calling me. The phone buzzed again, displaying a text message from Destiny. It was time to deal with the golden child. The text message on my screen was brief and completely unhinged. It just read, Pick up the phone right now, Maya. You owe me an explanation. Before I could even fully process the absolute audacity of the message, the phone began to ring. It was an unknown number, meaning Destiny had also resorted to using a prepaid burner phone, just like Aunt Denise had done earlier. Her primary cell phone had undoubtedly been confiscated by federal agents during the raid last night for digital forensics. They were likely pulling every text message and email she had ever sent to prove her complicity in the fraud. I walked back to my velvet sofa, sat down, and swiped the green button to accept the call. I did not say a single word to greet her. I just waited in complete silence for the golden child to speak first. "Maya, are you there?" Destiny demanded immediately. Her voice was thick with exhaustion and panic, but the familiar undertone of spoiled entitlement was still completely intact. She did not sound like a woman whose husband had just been exposed as a massive federal fraud in front of the entire city. She sounded exactly like a teenager throwing a massive tantrum because her premium credit card was declined at a luxury boutique. "I am here, Destiny," I replied, keeping my voice completely neutral and devoid of any sisterly warmth. "I am honestly surprised you have the free time to call me this morning. I would think you would be incredibly busy dealing with the federal authorities and desperately trying to secure a good criminal defense attorney for your husband. Do not play your stupid games with me, Maya." She snapped, her voice echoing loudly through the speaker of my phone. "You know exactly what you did last night. You orchestrated this entire circus just to humiliate us in front of the mayor and all those important investors. Chad is sitting in a federal detention center right now wearing a jumpsuit. They froze all of our bank accounts this morning. The agents took my laptop, my expensive jewelry, and they even towed my luxury car away from the country club parking lot. They said it was all purchased with illicit funds. I spent the entire night sitting on a hard plastic chair in a cold police station while investigators interrogated me for hours. You completely ruined my life." "I ruined your life," I repeated, letting a dry, humorless laugh escape my lips. "Destiny, your husband forged my legal signature to steal $2 million from a commercial bank. He dumped it all into a failed cryptocurrency scam because he is a terrible investor, and then he bribed our father with the remaining cash to cover up his tracks. You built your entire fake influencer lifestyle on stolen money and federal wire fraud. I did not ruin your life at all. I just turned on the bright lights so everyone could finally see the massive criminal mess you made." Destiny ignored the facts completely. In her twisted mind, she was always the ultimate victim, and everyone else was just jealous of her success. "Well, you are going to fix it," she demanded with absolute conviction. "I just got off the phone with the magistrate court downtown. The judge set Chad's bail at $250,000. Since the feds froze our accounts, I obviously cannot pay it right now. But I know you have the money, Maya. You just bought a $2 million commercial debt portfolio. You obviously have millions hidden away in your corporate accounts. I need you to wire the bail money to the court immediately so Chad can come home." I sat on my sofa completely stunned into silence for a brief moment. I genuinely could not comprehend the sheer magnitude of her delusion. She was not calling to apologize for laughing at me when our father threw my clothes onto the driveway like garbage. She was not calling to apologize for accusing me of stealing $500 in a fake, tearful social media video. She was calling to aggressively demand that I liquidate $250,000 of my own hard-earned money to bail out the exact man who stole my inheritance. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet whisper. "You want me to pay $250,000 to release the man who committed identity theft against me? You want me to rescue the man who stood on a stage 24 hours ago and tried to have security physically throw me out of a building that I legally owned? Why in the world would I ever do something so incredibly stupid? Because we are family." Destiny screamed into the phone, her voice breaking with frustration. "Family helps family, Maya. You are supposed to be the older sister. You are supposed to protect me when things go wrong. Chad made a mistake, but he is a true visionary. Once he gets out of jail, he can rebuild the wellness retreat company and pay you back with interest. You cannot just leave my husband locked in a cage like an animal. You owe us your support. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied sharply, cutting off her ridiculous rant. But since we are talking about financial assistance, let us take a quick walk down memory lane. Do you remember what happened 2 weeks ago on the front lawn of Dad's house? Do you remember when our father kicked me out and you stood on the porch laughing while checking your makeup in your phone camera? Chad walked down the driveway with a smug smile and threw a crumpled $100 bill at my feet. He told me to call a cheap rideshare and use the rest of the cash to survive on the streets. Destiny was quiet on the other end of the line. I pressed the attack without hesitation. That was his generous contribution to family helping family. I continued. So here is my official financial advice as a senior corporate accountant. I kept that $100 bill, I smoothed it out, and I saved it. I will happily mail it back to you today. You can take that crumpled $100 bill walk into a high-end federal defense law firm and hand it to a lawyer. See exactly how far that gets you in federal court against an armed prosecutor. You are a monster. Destiny sobbed, her misplaced anger finally giving way to genuine crushing panic. You are a cold, heartless monster, Maya. Where am I supposed to go now? The feds took our leased apartment because Chad paid the rent with fraudulent wires. The only place I have left in the world is Grandma's house. I am going to move into the old estate and start over. I will live there while Chad fights his case. You cannot take that away from me, too. It is my inheritance. I opened my laptop resting on the glass coffee table. Destiny Grandma's house was the primary collateral for the commercial loan Chad defaulted on. I explained, speaking very slowly so she could understand the absolute finality of her grim situation. When I bought the debt portfolio from the bank, I legally bought the deed to that property. You do not own a single blade of grass on that 50-acre estate, and I am certainly not letting you live there rent-free. I navigated to my secure email client and attached a formal legal document I had prepared with my attorneys earlier that morning. I typed in Destiny's email address. Check your inbox right now, I said. I just sent you a formal 3-day eviction notice. You have exactly 72 hours to clear any of your remaining personal belongings off my property. If you step foot on that land after the deadline expires, I will have the county sheriff arrest you for criminal trespassing. And unlike Chad, I will not offer you a chance to post bail. No, Maya, please do not do this! Destiny begged, her voice breaking completely into pathetic whimpers. I have absolutely nothing left. My friends will not even answer my calls anymore because they saw the arrest on the news. Please, I am your sister. You stopped being my sister the day you decided my complete destruction was the acceptable price for your fake success, I replied coldly. Enjoy the real-world, Destiny. It is a lot harder to survive when you actually have to work for a living. I pressed the red end call button and set the phone face down on the table. The perfect silence in my penthouse returned, settling over me like a warm, heavy blanket. The golden child had finally been dethroned, and the toxic family foundation, built on lies, had completely crumbled to dust. The golden child had finally been dethroned, and the toxic family foundation built on lies had completely crumbled to dust. 6 months have passed since that incredible night at the Belmont Country Club. The chaotic noise of my family desperately trying to save their fabricated reputation eventually faded into a profound and beautiful silence. When you remove a massive cancerous tumor from your life, the healing process is remarkably swift. The federal justice system moves with a terrifying efficiency when they are handed a perfectly wrapped package of forensic evidence. Chad found out exactly how harsh reality can be when you strip away the velvet tuxedos and the fake entrepreneurial podcasts. His trial was incredibly brief. The audio recording I provided, where he explicitly bragged about forging my signature and leveraging the stolen deed, was the absolute nail in his coffin. He tried to hire a flashy defense attorney, but because the federal agents had frozen every single bank account tied to his name, he had to settle for an overworked public defender. Facing decades of potential prison time, Chad cowardly accepted a plea deal. The federal judge sentenced him to 5 years in a high-security penitentiary. The arrogant man who constantly lectured me about building generational wealth and having a poverty mindset is currently wearing a standard-issue beige jumpsuit. He now makes 30 cents an hour wiping down cafeteria tables. His cryptocurrency wallet is entirely empty, and his grand legacy has been permanently reduced to a federal inmate number. My father faced an equally devastating public reckoning. The commercial bank, terrified of federal regulators, moved swiftly to liquidate the assets. They repossessed his custom-tailored Mercedes-Benz right out of his driveway in broad daylight. Because my holding company legally owned the defaulted debt, I exercised my right to officially evict the Community Grace congregation from the physical church building. The Board of Elders held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to strip my father of his pastoral title, excommunicating him from the very community he had manipulated for decades. He managed to avoid federal prison by fully cooperating with the prosecutors against Chad, but his financial and social ruin was absolute. Today, the formerly untouchable Reverend Calvin spends his early mornings wearing a cheap green apron. He works as a grocery bagger at a discount supermarket on the south side of Chicago. I heard from a distant cousin that my father constantly stares at the floor whenever former members of his congregation walk through his checkout lane. His pride was his entire religion, and I systematically dismantled every single brick of his temple. Destiny learned the hardest and most painful lesson of all. She thought I was bluffing about the eviction notice, but I am an accountant and I never bluff about paperwork. When her 72 hours expired and she refused to vacate Grandma's house, I sent the county sheriff to physically remove her from the premises. She stood on the dirt road crying hysterically as the deputies padlocked the front door. Her massive circle of influencer friends vanished into thin air the absolute second her bank accounts were frozen. Nobody wanted to be associated with the wife of a convicted federal fraud. Destiny now lives in a cheap rundown motel right off the interstate highway. There are no more luxury spa days, no more expensive champagne brunches, and no more Chanel purses. She works double shifts waiting tables at a local diner just to afford her weekly room rate. The untouchable golden child finally had to learn how to sweep a floor and earn an honest dollar. As for me, I am standing exactly where I belong. The bright summer sun is shining down warmly on the 50-acre estate my grandmother purchased decades ago. The air is completely filled with the loud, productive sounds of actual construction. Heavy machinery is pouring fresh concrete foundations, and workers are framing massive wooden beams. I did not sell the land to a corporate developer, and I am certainly not building a fake wellness retreat for wealthy executives to do yoga. I poured my own legitimate capital into this dirt to build something real. We are establishing the Dorothy Educational Initiative, named directly after the woman who actually understood the value of hard work. It is a comprehensive financial literacy and business development center specifically designed for young women of color in our community. We are going to teach them how to read complex contracts, how to secure legitimate corporate funding, and most importantly, how to protect themselves from financial predators, exactly like the men in my family. I walk across the freshly cleared dirt wearing a hard hat and a pair of sturdy work boots. I look at the blueprints unrolled on the hood of my truck, and I feel a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. I look directly into the camera lens, and I want you to hear this loud and clear. They thought they could humiliate me into submission. They thought my silence was weakness and my absence was a failure. But loyalty is earned, not owed, just because we happen to share blood. I did not destroy my family. I just let them cash the massive checks they arrogantly wrote. Remember, sometimes the best revenge is not anger or screaming or throwing insults on the internet. Sometimes the best revenge is an audit. If my story resonated with you today and you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your absolute worth, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that they hold the power to rewrite their own legacy. Let me know in the comments below how you walked away from the people who tried to hold you back. Thank you for watching, and remember to always protect your peace and your paperwork. Maya's story highlights a profound and often painful truth about family dynamics. Society conditions us to believe that blood relations demand unconditional loyalty, regardless of how we are treated. However, this narrative powerfully dismantles that dangerous myth. The central lesson here is that shared DNA does not excuse toxic behavior, financial abuse, or emotional manipulation. For years, Maya was expected to play the role of the compliant scapegoat, while her father and sister hid behind a facade of religious and social righteousness. They weaponized the concept of family to demand her submission and ultimately tried to steal her inheritance. Her journey teaches us that setting firm and uncompromising boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a completely necessary step for self-preservation. Furthermore, the story illustrates that true empowerment comes from quiet preparation rather than loud arguments. Instead of engaging in screaming matches on the front lawn, Maya used her professional skills, her intellect, and the law to protect herself. She gathered evidence, secured her financial independence, and let her abusers' own blinding arrogance become their ultimate downfall. It reminds us that we do not owe our peace of mind to those who actively try to destroy it. We have the absolute right to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served, even if that table happens to be inside our childhood home. True family should be a sanctuary of mutual support and not a battlefield of relentless exploitation. Ultimately, healing begins the moment we stop accepting mistreatment disguised as tough love. You are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic relatives warm. Please share this video with someone who might need the courage to set their own healthy boundaries today.